My live-in caregivers had no idea that when they installed hidden cameras in my bathroom to monitor my safety and prevent falls, they were actually violating the privacy of Margaret Maggie Sullivan, the former investigative journalist who had exposed 3 major government scandals, maintained contacts at every major news network from CNN to Fox News, and could turn their criminal elder abuse into the most public humiliation that any privacy-violating and caregivers had ever received on national television. Before we dive into how I orchestrated the most legendary media takedown in elder care history, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I'm sharing the story of how a nursing home patient who was being systematically drugged and robbed turned out to be a retired federal judge, and what happened when she called her former colleagues at the Department of Justice. The systematic invasion of privacy that would ultimately expose the dark underbelly of elder care exploitation began on a crisp October morning in 2024. Exactly 6 months after my mild stroke had temporarily transformed me from Margaret Maggie Sullivan, award-winning investigative journalist and media industry veteran, into what appeared to be just another vulnerable 70-year-old widow requiring professional care assistance in my modest 2-story colonial home at 428 Maple Creek Lane in the picturesque suburb of Millfield, Connecticut. The stroke itself had been relatively minor, what my neurologist, Dr. Patricia Chen, had described as a transient ischemic episode that primarily affected my speech coordination and left side motor actions for several weeks following the incident. The medical reality was that with proper physical therapy, speech therapy, and temporary assistance with certain daily activities, I would make a complete recovery within 6 to 9 months. However, the appearance of vulnerability and dependency that characterized my immediate post-stroke period created exactly the kind of opportunity that unscrupulous caregivers sought when targeting elderly clients for systematic exploitation and abuse. The decision to arrange for in-home care rather than temporary assisted living had been made after extensive consultation with my primary physician, Dr. Robert Martinez, who had been treating me for over 15 years and understood both my fierce independence and my determination to maintain control over my living environment during the recovery process. Dr. Martinez had specifically recommended Riverside Home Care Agency based on their apparent reputation for professional, respectful elder care services and their systematic approach to coordinating medical recovery with dignity preservation and independence maintenance throughout the healing process. What neither Dr. Martinez nor I realized at the time was that Riverside Home Care Agency had developed a sophisticated business model that extended far beyond legitimate healthcare services into systematic elder exploitation, privacy invasion, and financial manipulation that targeted wealthy elderly clients living alone in valuable properties throughout affluent suburban communities. Their carefully crafted professional presentation and medical credentials masked a calculated operation designed to identify vulnerable elderly individuals with significant assets and minimal family oversight, then systematically exploit their temporary dependency through privacy violations, financial access, and comprehensive surveillance that enabled identity theft, asset evaluation, and the kind of systematic abuse that thrives in isolation while maintaining plausible medical justification. The initial consultation with Riverside Home Care Agency had occurred 3 weeks after my stroke, when I was still experiencing speech difficulties and coordination challenges that made independent living temporarily challenging but not impossible. The agency representative's Director of Client Services Linda Hoffman and Senior Care Coordinator David Reynolds had presented themselves as experienced healthcare professionals, committed to providing dignified, respectful care that prioritized client autonomy while ensuring appropriate safety oversight during recovery periods. Linda Hoffman's presentation during our initial meeting had emphasized Riverside's commitment to client-centered care that honors individual dignity, while providing comprehensive safety coordination and medical support. Her systematic attention to my concerns about privacy, independence, and personal boundaries had seemed to demonstrate genuine understanding of elderly care principles and professional respect for client autonomy. The detailed care plan that she presented included specific provisions for privacy protection, limited surveillance restricted to common areas for fall prevention, and systematic coordination with my medical team to ensure appropriate care progression and independence restoration. David Reynolds had reinforced Hoffman's professional presentation with detailed explanations of their caregiver training programs, background screening procedures, and systematic approach to elderly care that emphasized respect, dignity, and appropriate professional boundaries. His discussion of their graduated care model that reduced supervision and assistance as clients recovered their independence had seemed to demonstrate genuine commitment to recovery support rather than dependency creation. The references they provided from other clients and medical professionals had supported their claims about professional, respectful care services that prioritized client welfare and dignity preservation. The care team that Riverside assigned to my case included two primary caregivers who would alternate 12-hour shifts to provide round-the-clock availability during my initial recovery period. Sarah Mitchell, a certified nursing assistant with 7 years of elder care experience, was assigned to the day shift from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., while Tommy Rodriguez, also a certified nursing assistant with 5 years of experience, covered the night shift from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Both caregivers had presented professional credentials, clean background checks, and systematic training in elderly care principles that seemed to support their qualifications for providing respectful, appropriate care services. Sarah Mitchell's initial approach to my care had seemed genuinely professional and respectful. Her systematic attention to my privacy preferences, careful coordination of assistance with personal care tasks, and appropriate boundaries regarding personal space and independence had created confidence in Riverside's training and professional standards. Her daily routine included assistance with medication management, coordination of physical therapy exercises, meal preparation support, and general safety oversight that seemed appropriately limited to medical necessity while respecting my autonomy and personal preferences. Tommy Rodriguez had also initially demonstrated professional behavior and appropriate care boundaries during his night shift responsibilities. His primary duties included safety monitoring during sleeping hours, assistance with any nighttime needs, emergency response coordination, and basic household security oversight that seemed appropriately focused on medical support rather than comprehensive surveillance. His respectful interaction with my personal space, systematic attention to privacy during personal care assistance, and professional communication about care coordination had supported the impression of legitimate, appropriate elder care services. The gradual transformation from appropriate medical care to systematic boundary violations had been so subtle and professionally presented that my journalistic instincts, normally finely tuned to deception and manipulation, were initially overwhelmed by my legitimate medical needs and temporary cognitive challenges following the stroke. The speech difficulties and coordination problems that characterized my early recovery period had created genuine dependency that masked the gradual expansion of surveillance and control that extended far beyond medical necessity into comprehensive privacy invasion and personal boundary violations. The first indication that something was amiss occurred approximately 3 weeks into my care arrangement, when I began noticing small but systematic changes in my personal belongings and household organization that suggested more extensive access to my private spaces than necessary for legitimate care coordination. Items in my bedroom had been repositioned, personal papers had been reorganized, and my computer showed evidence of access that extended beyond the basic monitoring that Sarah had explained as necessary. Why for medication reminders and appointment coordination? The medication management system that Sarah had implemented included detailed documentation of my prescription schedule, systematic coordination with my pharmacy for refill management, and comprehensive tracking of my medical appointments and therapy sessions. However, the level of detail in her documentation seemed to extend beyond medical necessity into personal habit monitoring, daily routine analysis, and systematic assessment of my cognitive function and independence level that suggested data collection for purposes unrelated to my immediate healthcare needs. Tommy's approach to night shift monitoring had also gradually expanded beyond appropriate safety oversight into more comprehensive household surveillance and personal space access. His systematic checking of all rooms throughout the house, detailed documentation of my sleep patterns and nighttime activities, and increasing familiarity with my personal belongings and household organization suggested monitoring that exceeded professional Our requirements and approached systematic intelligence gathering about my lifestyle, habits, and personal circumstances. The technology coordination that both caregivers had implemented as part of my safety monitoring system included installation of emergency alert devices, medication reminder systems, and basic monitoring equipment that they presented as standard safety precautions for elderly clients recovering from stroke-related incidents. However, the sophistication and extent of the electronic systems they installed seemed disproportionate to my actual medical needs and recovery status, suggesting surveillance capability that extended far beyond emergency response and medication management. The financial coordination assistance that Sarah had offered as part of comprehensive care services included help with bill payment organization, appointment scheduling coordination, and basic household management support that initially seemed helpful given my temporary coordination difficulties. However, her systematic interest in my financial arrangements, detailed questions about my banking procedures, and increasing involvement in personal business coordination suggested information gathering that exceeded appropriate care assistance and approached financial surveillance and asset assessment. The communication monitoring that both caregivers had implemented under the guise of emergency coordination included systematic awareness of my phone calls, email correspondence, and personal communications that they presented as necessary for medical coordination and family notification procedures. However, the level of detail in their knowledge about my personal relationships, communication patterns, and social interactions suggested systematic monitoring that violated privacy boundaries while gathering comprehensive information about my social network and potential oversight from family or friends. The household access patterns that characterized both caregivers' approach to my care included systematic familiarity with all areas of my home, detailed knowledge of my personal belongings and storage systems, and comprehensive understanding of my daily routines and personal habits that exceeded professional care requirements. Their increasing comfort with accessing private spaces, systematic organization of my personal items, and detailed awareness of my lifestyle patterns suggested surveillance and intelligence gathering that served purposes unrelated to my legitimate healthcare needs. The medical coordination documentation that both caregivers maintained included detailed records of my recovery progress, systematic assessment of my cognitive function and independence level, and comprehensive tracking of my daily activities and personal capabilities that seemed designed to build a case for extended care dependency rather than supporting my recovery and independence restoration. Their systematic emphasis on my limitations rather than improvements, detailed documentation of any confusion or difficulty, and apparent reluctance to acknowledge my recovering capabilities suggested agenda that prioritized continued dependency over successful rehabilitation. The family communication coordination that the caregivers had offered to manage included contact with my adult children who lived in different states and systematic updates about my condition and care needs that initially seemed helpful for keeping family informed about my recovery progress. However, their control over information sharing, systematic presentation of my condition as more severe than medical reality supported, and apparent efforts to discourage family visits suggested manipulation designed to maintain isolation while building justification for continued comprehensive care services. The professional network isolation that gradually characterized my care arrangement included systematic discouragement of contact with former colleagues, strategic scheduling that conflicted with professional meetings or social interactions, and apparent concern about overwhelming my recovery with too much stimulation or activity. This isolation from my extensive professional network in journalism and media connections that represented decades of relationship building and mutual respect created the perfect environment for privacy violations and exploitation to occur without outside observation or intervention. The recovery timeline manipulation that both caregivers employed included systematic emphasis on potential setbacks, detailed documentation of any temporary confusion or difficulty, and apparent reluctance to acknowledge improvement or increased capability that would support reduced care dependency. Their presentation of my condition to medical professionals seemed designed to extend care duration, while their interaction with me emphasized limitation and vulnerability rather than strength and recovery progress. The security protocol establishment that the caregivers implemented included systematic control over household access, detailed monitoring of visitors and deliveries, and comprehensive oversight of my communications and appointments that they presented as necessary security measures for elderly clients living alone. However, the extent of their control over access to my home and monitoring of my personal interactions suggested systematic isolation designed to prevent outside observation of their care methods and household access patterns. This comprehensive foundation of systematic boundary violations, privacy invasion, and control establishment created the perfect environment for the installation of surveillance equipment that would eventually extend into my most private spaces, while maintaining plausible medical justification for comprehensive monitoring and safety oversight. The gradual expansion of their access and control had been so professionally presented and medically justified that even my experienced investigative instincts had been temporarily overwhelmed by legitimate recovery needs and temporary dependency that masked the sophisticated exploitation operation that was systematically documenting my lifestyle, assessing my assets, and preparing for the kind of comprehensive privacy violation that would ultimately trigger the most public elder abuse exposure in media history. The masterpiece of deception that I had unintentionally created during my stroke recovery required no conscious effort on my part. The genuine medical vulnerability and temporary dependency that characterized my post-stroke condition provided the perfect foundation for caregivers who viewed elderly clients as opportunities for exploitation rather than individuals deserving professional respect and appropriate medical care. The physical and cognitive challenges that I experienced during my recovery period created such a convincing portrait of elderly vulnerability that even my own sharp journalistic instincts were temporarily overwhelmed by legitimate medical needs and temporary limitations. The physical presentation that supported my vulnerable elderly persona began each morning with a careful selection of clothing that prioritized comfort and ease of dressing over professional appearance or personal style. The soft cotton house dresses and muted florals that I wore during my recovery period, purchased specifically for their loose fit and simple closure systems, created the perfect image of an elderly woman whose wardrobe choices had been reduced to practical necessity rather than personal preference or social presentation. The comfortable slippers with non-slip soles that replaced my usual professional footwear, combined with the simple cardigans that I layered for warmth and comfort, reinforced the impression of someone whose daily routine had been simplified to accommodate physical limitations and reduced activity levels. The walking pattern that I had developed during my recovery included a slight shuffle that reflected genuine balance concerns following my stroke, occasional use of a walking cane for stability during longer distances, and systematic attention to handrails and furniture support that demonstrated realistic age-related mobility challenges without appearing dramatically impaired. My careful attention to moving slowly through the house, taking extra time with stairs, and occasionally requesting assistance with tasks that required reaching or coordination created comprehensive evidence of physical limitation while maintaining complete authenticity about stroke-related recovery challenges and elderly safety concerns. The speech patterns that characterized my communication during the early recovery period included occasional word-finding difficulties, that reflected genuine stroke-related language processing challenges. Systematic pauses to organize thoughts before speaking, and the kind of communication hesitation that convinced caregivers they were dealing with cognitive processing limitations rather than temporary medical recovery issues. My systematic requests for clarification about complex instructions, apparent difficulty following rapid conversations, and preference for simple, clear communication created compelling evidence of cognitive vulnerability while reinforcing assumptions about elderly mental processing decline and dependency needs. The memory inconsistencies that I occasionally displayed during daily interactions included apparent confusion about recent events, systematic difficulty recalling specific appointment times and medication schedules, and the kind of cognitive processing challenges that convinced caregivers they were witnessing stroke-related cognitive decline rather than temporary medical recovery symptoms that would improve with proper treatment and rehabilitation. My systematic questions about previous conversations, apparent confusion about daily scheduling, and requests for written reminders about important information created comprehensive evidence of memory processing limitations while building justification for increased supervision and assistance. The medication management routine that Sarah and Tommy observed daily provided systematic evidence of both health complexity and cognitive processing limitations that convinced them they were dealing with a woman whose medical coordination was becoming too challenging for independent management while requiring comprehensive oversight and assistance. The weekly pill organizer that sat prominently on my kitchen counter, filled with prescriptions for blood pressure, cholesterol management, and stroke prevention medications, alongside detailed instruction sheets about timing and dosage, created perfect evidence of medical complexity while demonstrating the kind of health maintenance challenges that elderly individuals face when managing multiple chronic conditions. The apparent confusion about prescription coordination that I displayed whenever the caregivers offered assistance included systematic questions about medication interactions, apparent anxiety about side effects and dosing accuracy, and the kind of healthcare navigation challenges that convinced them my medical management was becoming too complex for independent coordination while requiring family oversight and professional assistance. My systematic requests for clarification about drug timing, apparent difficulty understanding dosing instructions, and preference for caregiver involvement in medication management created compelling evidence of healthcare dependency while reinforcing assumptions about cognitive processing limitations and medical decision-making challenges. The financial management approach that I demonstrated throughout my daily routines included careful attention to expense tracking, systematic organization of bills and financial documents, and the kind of money management that suggested both cognitive processing challenges and anxiety about financial coordination that convinced caregivers they were dealing with someone whose financial decision-making was becoming increasingly challenging while requiring oversight and assistance. The envelope system that I used for organizing monthly expenses, combined with my handwritten budget notebook and systematic tracking of household purchases, created evidence of financial management difficulty while demonstrating the kind of careful coordination that elderly individuals employ when cognitive processing changes require simplified systems. The banking coordination evidence that Sarah observed during our shared errands included systematic preference for in-person transactions over electronic banking, apparent confusion about automated systems and online financial management, and the kind of financial institution navigation that suggested both technology limitation and cognitive processing challenges rather than deliberate avoidance of electronic systems that could be monitored or manipulated. My systematic requests for paper statements, preference for speaking directly with bank tellers, and apparent anxiety about electronic security created compelling evidence of elderly financial management limitations while positioning caregivers as necessary assistance providers for complex financial coordination. The technology limitations that I displayed whenever Sarah or Tommy attempted to help me with modern devices included apparent confusion about smartphone operations, systematic difficulty with television remote controls and entertainment systems, and the kind of digital literacy challenges that convinced them my cognitive processing had declined significantly while my learning capability had been reduced to the point where technology assistance was becoming a caregiver responsibility rather than individual capability. My systematic requests for repeated explanations about basic device operations, apparent anxiety about internet security and electronic privacy, and preference for traditional communication methods over digital coordination created comprehensive evidence of technology dependency. The household organization patterns that both caregivers observed included apparent difficulty maintaining systematic storage systems, occasional confusion about item locations, and the kind of domestic coordination challenges that suggested cognitive processing limitations rather than temporary disruption caused by having strangers reorganizing personal belongings and household systems. My systematic requests for assistance finding basic items, apparent confusion about storage locations that had been changed by caregiver organization, and difficulty maintaining household coordination created additional evidence of cognitive limitation while providing perfect justification for increased household access and control. The cooking and meal preparation challenges that I demonstrated included apparent difficulty following complex recipes, systematic preference for simple food preparation, and the kind of culinary coordination limitations that suggested both cognitive processing challenges and physical coordination difficulties rather than strategic meal simplification designed to avoid kitchen conflicts while accommodating temporary stroke-related coordination challenges. My apparent confusion about modern kitchen appliances, systematic requests for assistance with cooking coordination, and preference for pre-prepared foods created evidence of domestic capability decline while positioning caregivers as necessary assistance providers for basic nutrition management. The social interaction patterns that characterized my behavior during the few visitor interactions that occurred included apparent difficulty following complex conversations, systematic confusion about current events and recent developments, and the kind of social processing challenges that suggested cognitive decline rather than temporary stroke-related communication difficulties that would improve with proper speech therapy and social interaction. My preference for simple conversation topics, systematic requests for clarification about complex discussions, and apparent fatigue during social interaction created compelling evidence of social limitation, while reinforcing assumptions about elderly social processing decline and dependency needs. The sleep pattern disruptions that both caregivers documented included early bedtime coordination, systematic complaints about sleep quality and nighttime restlessness, and the kind of rest management challenges that suggested age-related health issues rather than anxiety and stress caused by having strangers monitoring nighttime activities and accessing private spaces during vulnerable sleeping hours. My systematic preference for quiet evening activities, apparent fatigue during day activities, and early morning wake-up patterns created evidence of elderly sleep management challenges while providing perfect justification for comprehensive nighttime monitoring and bedroom access. The personal care routine that both caregivers observed included systematic attention to basic hygiene coordination, apparent difficulty with complex grooming tasks, and the kind of self-care management that suggested both physical coordination challenges and cognitive processing limitations rather than temporary stroke-related difficulties that would improve with proper rehabilitation and independence restoration. My systematic preference for simple hairstyles, basic makeup application when necessary, and comfortable clothing coordination created evidence of personal care simplification while reinforcing assumptions about elderly self-care capability decline and assistance needs. The appointment coordination challenges that I displayed included apparent confusion about scheduling systems, systematic difficulty remembering appointment times, and medical coordination, and the kind of healthcare navigation that convinced caregivers my medical management was becoming too complex for independent coordination while requiring comprehensive oversight and assistance. My systematic requests for written appointment reminders, apparent anxiety about medical scheduling conflicts, and preference for caregiver accompaniment to medical appointments created additional evidence of healthcare dependency while positioning caregivers as necessary medical coordination facilitators. The exercise and physical therapy coordination that characterized my recovery routine included systematic attention to prescribed exercises, apparent difficulty maintaining therapy schedules without assistance, and the kind of rehabilitation coordination that suggested both physical limitation and cognitive processing challenges with complex medical instructions. My systematic requests for assistance with exercise equipment, apparent confusion about therapy progression, and preference for caregiver supervision during physical activities created compelling evidence of rehabilitation dependency while reinforcing assumptions about elderly exercise capability limitations and safety concerns. The emergency preparedness evidence that I maintained included systematic attention to safety planning, apparent anxiety about crisis coordination, and the kind of emergency management that convinced caregivers my safety coordination was becoming too complex for independent management while requiring comprehensive oversight and protective assistance. The emergency contact information that I kept prominently displayed, combined with my systematic expressions of concern about emergency communication and apparent difficulty understanding crisis response procedures, created evidence of elderly emergency management limitations while providing perfect justification for comprehensive safety monitoring and access control. The communication management patterns that both caregivers observed included systematic preference for simple, direct conversation, apparent difficulty processing complex information or multi-step instructions, and the kind of information coordination that suggested cognitive processing limitations rather than temporary stroke-related communication challenges that would improve with proper speech therapy and cognitive rehabilitation. My systematic requests for repeated explanations, apparent confusion about complex topics, and preference for written information over verbal instructions created comprehensive evidence of communicatio independency while positioning caregivers as necessary information processing facilitators. The entertainment preferences that characterized my daily routine included systematic selection of simple television programming, basic reading materials, and the kind of intellectual stimulation that suggested cognitive capacity reduction rather than temporary stroke-related concentration difficulties that would improve with proper rehabilitation and cognitive therapy. My systematic preference for familiar shows over new programming, apparent difficulty following complex plot developments, and reduced attention span for reading activities created evidence of intellectual limitation, while reinforcing assumptions about elderly entertainment capability decline and simplification needs. The financial decision-making hesitation that I displayed included systematic requests for caregiver input about basic purchases, apparent anxiety about spending decisions, and the kind of economic coordination that convinced caregivers they were dealing with someone whose financial judgment was becoming compromised while requiring oversight and decision-making assistance. My systematic deferral to caregiver opinions about household purchases, apparent confusion about price comparisons, and requests for guidance about basic financial choices created compelling evidence of economic decision-making limitation while positioning caregivers as necessary financial oversight providers. The medical compliance coordination that both caregivers documented included systematic attention to following medical instructions, apparent difficulty understanding complex treatment protocols, and the kind of healthcare management that suggested both cognitive processing challenges and medical system navigation limitations rather than temporary stroke-related comprehension difficulties that would improve with proper patient education and rehabilitation support. My systematic requests for clarification about medical procedures, apparent anxiety about treatment compliance, and preference for caregiver involvement in medical decision-making created additional evidence of healthcare dependency. The home maintenance awareness that I displayed included apparent difficulty coordinating property upkeep, systematic concerns about household repair needs, and the kind of property management that suggested both physical limitations and cognitive processing challenges with complex maintenance coordination rather than temporary stroke-related organizational difficulties that would improve with proper rehabilitation and independence restoration. My systematic requests for assistance with household maintenance decisions, apparent confusion about repair coordination, and anxiety about property management costs created evidence of domestic management limitation, while providing perfect justification for increased household access and control. The transportation coordination challenges that I demonstrated included systematic preference for caregiver assistance with driving, apparent anxiety about independent travel, and the kind of mobility management that suggested both physical coordination concerns and cognitive processing limitations with complex navigation rather than temporary stroke-related confidence issues that would improve with proper rehabilitation and gradual independence restoration. My systematic requests for transportation assistance, apparent confusion about route planning, and preference for familiar destinations created compelling evidence of mobility dependency while reinforcing assumptions about elderly transportation capability decline. The legal document coordination that I occasionally requested assistance with included apparent difficulty understanding complex paperwork, systematic confusion about legal procedures, and the kind of legal management that suggested both cognitive processing challenges and institutional navigation limitations rather than temporary stroke-related comprehension difficulties that would improve with proper rehabilitation and cognitive therapy. My systematic requests for clarification about legal documents, apparent anxiety about legal procedures, and preference for professional assistance with legal coordination created evidence of legal management dependency while positioning caregivers as necessary legal oversight facilitators. The insurance coordination evidence that characterized my approach to coverage management included systematic attention to policy documentation, apparent confusion about coverage details and claim procedures, and the kind of insurance navigation that suggested both cognitive processing challenges and institutional coordination limitations rather than temporary stroke-related organizational difficulties that would improve with proper rehabilitation and administrative support. My systematic questions about coverage coordination, apparent anxiety about insurance compliance, and preference for assistance with insurance communication created additional evidence of institutional dependency while providing perfect justification for comprehensive financial oversight and access. The utility management patterns that both caregivers observed included apparent difficulty coordinating household services, systematic concerns about utility costs and service coordination, and the kind of property management that suggested both cognitive processing challenges and institutional navigation limitations rather than temporary stroke-related organizational difficulties that would improve with proper rehabilitation and independence restoration. My systematic requests for assistance with utility coordination, apparent confusion about service management, and anxiety about household service costs created evidence of property management dependency while reinforcing assumptions about elderly utility coordination capability decline. The investment coordination evidence that I occasionally displayed included apparent confusion about financial planning, systematic anxiety about investment decisions, and the kind of financial management that suggested both cognitive processing challenges and economic coordination limitations rather than deliberate information management designed to conceal sophisticated financial knowledge and professional investment experience. My systematic requests for clarification about financial planning, apparent confusion about investment coordination, and preference for simple financial management created compelling evidence of economic dependency, while positioning caregivers as necessary financial oversight providers. This comprehensive collection of daily evidence that supported my vulnerable elderly persona created exactly the foundation that Sarah and Tommy needed to do. stify their systematic boundary violations, while building their confidence that they were dealing with a cognitively declining elderly woman, whose limitations required constant supervision rather than recognizing the temporary stroke-related challenges that would improve with proper rehabilitation. The sophisticated professional intelligence that was carefully observing their behavior patterns, or the extensive media industry connections that would prove invaluable when comprehensive documentation of their exploitation methods became necessary for public exposure and justice deliver. Why? The systematic nature of this evidence accumulation ensured that both caregivers never questioned the authenticity of my vulnerable presentation. Because every aspect of my daily life reinforced the narrative they wanted to believe while providing multiple confirmation points for their assumptions about elderly limitation and dependency. The careful coordination of all these evidence streams created an unshakable foundation for their belief in my decline while building their confidence in their authority and control over my living situation, medical coordination, and personal privacy confidence that would prove catastrophically misplaced when their systematic privacy violations extended into my most intimate spaces and triggered the comprehensive media investigation that would expose their exploitation methods to national scrutiny and criminal prosecution. The transformation of Sarah Mitchell from seemingly caring healthcare professional into sophisticated elder exploitation coordinator had been shaped by a toxic combination of financial desperation, professional resentment, and systematic exposure to vulnerable elderly clients whose wealth and isolation created irresistible opportunities for someone whose moral boundaries had been gradually eroded by years of economic struggle and professional disappointment in an industry that demanded emotional labor while providing minimal financial compensation or career advancement opportunities. Sarah's background as the eldest daughter in a working-class family from Bridgeport, Connecticut, had provided her with exactly the kind of financial insecurity and social positioning anxiety that created the perfect foundation for viewing elder care as economic opportunity rather than professional service. Her parents, Robert and Maria Mitchell, had both worked multiple jobs throughout her childhood, her father managing inventory at a medical supply warehouse while driving for a courier service on weekends, her mother working as a school cafeteria supervisor while cleaning medical offices in the evenings, creating a household atmosphere that emphasized financial struggle as the primary source of stress and family tension while positioning wealth acquisition as the ultimate solution to life's challenges and relationship problems. The economic pressure that had characterized Sarah's upbringing included systematic attention to expense management, careful coordination of employment opportunities, and the kind of financial anxiety that convinced her from an early age that economic security was the foundation of dignity and happiness while financial limitation was the source of shame and social inadequacy. Her childhood memories were dominated by conversations about bills, debt, and the systematic comparison of her family's economic status with their more prosperous neighbors, creating a worldview that measured personal worth through material accumulation and financial achievement rather than character development, professional integrity, or community contribution and service. The educational pathway that brought Sarah into healthcare had been motivated primarily by economic considerations rather than genuine calling to elder care or medical service. Her selection of a certified nursing assistant program at a community college was driven by the promise of stable employment in a growing healthcare industry, rather than authentic interest in patient care or elderly welfare. The substantial student loans that she accumulated during her training were viewed as acceptable debt because they provided access to healthcare employment that offered better compensation and benefits than retail or service industry alternatives available to someone with her educational background and family resources. The early career experiences that shaped Sarah's approach to elder care included systematic exposure to wealthy elderly clients whose assets and isolation created opportunities for financial manipulation and exploitation that gradually normalized boundary violations and privacy invasions. as acceptable professional behavior rather than criminal abuse requiring ethical restraint and professional accountability. Her first position at a luxury assisted living facility in Greenwich had provided comprehensive education and identifying vulnerable elderly clients with significant assets and minimal family oversight, while teaching practical techniques for building dependency relationships and gaining access to personal financial information through systematic trust manipulation and professional authority abuse. The psychological profile that emerged through Sarah's career development revealed a character structure built on resentment, entitlement, and systematic rationalization of exploitation rather than authentic compassion, professional integrity, or collaborative service orientation. Her growing bitterness about the economic disparity between her clients' wealth and her own financial struggles created moral flexibility that justified increasingly aggressive boundary violations and privacy invasions as fair compensation for emotional labor and professional service rather than recognizing the criminal nature of elder abuse and the ethical violations that characterized her systematic exploitation of client vulnerability and trust. The professional network that Sarah had cultivated within the elder care industry included relationships with other caregivers, healthcare administrators, and service providers who shared her cynical approach to client relationships and systematic exploitation of elderly vulnerability for personal financial gain. The informal coordination between these individuals created systematic information sharing about vulnerable clients, practical techniques for accessing personal financial information, and strategic planning for exploitation that operated beneath the official oversight of healthcare institutions and regulatory authorities while maintaining the appearance of professional medical service and compassionate elder care. The financial management philosophy that guided Sarah's approach to elder care included systematic assessment of client assets, strategic positioning for inheritance opportunities, and the kind of economic planning that viewed elderly clients primarily as financial resources rather than individuals deserving respect, dignity, and professional medical care. Her systematic attention to client property values, investment portfolios, and family relationship dynamics demonstrated calculated planning for long-term financial benefit rather than genuine concern for client welfare or professional medical service quality and ethical patient care standards. The manipulation techniques that Sarah had perfected through years of elder care experience included systematic creation of emotional dependency, strategic isolation from family and external relationships, and the kind of psychological control that positioned herself as essential caregiver while eliminating client autonomy and decision-making capability. Her sophisticated understanding of elderly psychological vulnerability, combined with systematic exploitation of cognitive challenges and physical limitations, created comprehensive control relationships that served her financial objectives while maintaining the appearance of compassionate professional care and dedicated medical service. Thomas Tommy Rodriguez represented a different but equally dangerous profile within the elder exploitation network, a charming, seemingly caring individual whose surface appeal masked systematic manipulation skills and financial desperation that made elderly client abuse appear as practical economic opportunity rather than criminal behavior requiring ethical restraint and professional accountability. His background as a second-generation Mexican-American from Hartford, Connecticut, had provided him with cultural sensitivity and communication skills that made elderly clients trust him while concealing predatory intentions and systematic planning for financial exploitation and privacy violation. Tommy's early life had been characterized by economic instability and family dysfunction that included parental addiction issues, periodic homelessness, and systematic exposure to criminal behavior that normalized boundary violations and exploitation as survival strategies rather than moral failures requiring personal accountability and behavioral change. His childhood experiences with adult authority figures who exploited their positions for personal gain had created psychological modeling that justified elder abuse as practical resource acquisition rather than recognizing the criminal nature of his systematic violations of client trust and professional responsibility. The educational background that brought Tommy into healthcare had been motivated by court-ordered community service requirements following juvenile criminal charges, rather than genuine interest in medical care or elderly welfare. His completion of a nursing assistant certification program while serving probation for theft and fraud charges demonstrated systematic manipulation of rehabilitation requirements, rather than authentic character development or professional commitment to ethical patient care and elderly dignity preservation. The career development that characterized Tommy's progression within elder care included systematic movement between healthcare facilities and home care agencies, often following investigations into client complaints or financial irregularities that suggested ongoing exploitation activities rather than professional growth or improved patient care capability. His ability to maintain professional credentials and employment despite repeated suspicions about his client relationships demonstrated sophisticated understanding of healthcare industry oversight limitations and regulatory system weaknesses that enabled continued access to vulnerable elderly clients. The psychological manipulation techniques that Tommy employed with elderly clients included systematic creation of emotional attachment, strategic presentation as surrogate family member, and the kind of relationship development that positioned him as essential emotional support while eliminating client boundaries and privacy protection. His sophisticated understanding of elderly loneliness and social isolation, combined with systematic exploitation of cognitive vulnerabilities and physical dependencies, created comprehensive control relationships that served his financial objectives, while maintaining the appearance of genuine affection and dedicated professional care. The criminal network coordination that connected Sarah and Tommy involved systematic information sharing about vulnerable clients, strategic planning for comprehensive exploitation operations, and the kind of collaborative criminal activity that maximized financial opportunities while minimizing individual risk and regulatory detection. Their partnership in elder exploitation demonstrated sophisticated understanding of healthcare system weaknesses and oversight limitations that enabled systematic abuse, while maintaining professional credentials and continued access to vulnerable elderly populations. Linda Hoffman, the Director of Client Services at Riverside Home Care Agency, represented the administrative enablement and institutional support that made systematic elder exploitation possible on a large scale through official healthcare channels and professional medical service coordination. Her background in healthcare administration had provided comprehensive understanding of regulatory requirements and oversight limitations that enabled institutional protection for exploitative caregivers while maintaining the appearance of quality elder care services and professional medical standards. Linda's professional development had been characterized by systematic prioritization of financial performance over client welfare, strategic manipulation of regulatory compliance procedures, and the kind of administrative leadership that enabled caregiver exploitation while protecting institutional liability and maintaining healthcare licensing requirements. Her sophisticated understanding of healthcare documentation requirements and reporting procedures created systematic protection for exploitative staff while eliminating client advocacy and family oversight that might interfere with profitable elder exploitation operations. The business model that Linda had developed for Riverside Home Care Agency included systematic targeting of wealthy elderly clients with minimal family oversight, strategic placement of exploitative caregivers with vulnerable clients, and comprehensive institutional support for systematic boundary violations and privacy invasions disguised as professional medical care and elderly safety coordination. Her coordination of this exploitation network demonstrated sophisticated understanding of elder care industry opportunities and regulatory system weaknesses that enabled large-scale criminal activity while maintaining healthcare licensing and professional credibility. David Reynolds, the Senior Care Coordinator at Riverside Home Care Agency, provided the clinical expertise and medical justification that enabled systematic elder exploitation to appear as professional healthcare service and therapeutic intervention, rather than criminal abuse requiring legal prosecution and regulatory sanctions. His background as a licensed practical nurse had provided legitimate medical credentials that masked systematic participation in elder exploitation while maintaining professional respectability and healthcare authority. David's role in the exploitation network included systematic development of medical justifications for comprehensive surveillance and privacy violations, strategic coordination of exploitative care plans that maximized caregiver access while minimizing family oversight, and professional documentation that supported continued dependency and extended care requirements rather than client recovery and independence restoration. His sophisticated understanding of medical terminology and healthcare procedures created systematic legitimization of criminal behavior while maintaining the appearance of professional medical care and therapeutic intervention. The institutional protection system that Riverside Home Care Agency had developed included systematic legal coordination for exploitation defense, strategic public relations management for reputation protection, and comprehensive insurance coverage for criminal liability that enable continued elder exploitation while minimizing institutional consequences and regulatory sanctions. The sophisticated coordination between administrative leadership, clinical staff, and legal representation demonstrated systematic preparation for exploitation operations and criminal activity defense, rather than genuine commitment to quality elder care and professional medical service. The client targeting methodology that the Riverside Exploitation Network employed included systematic assessment of elderly vulnerability indicators, strategic evaluation of family oversight limitations, and comprehensive analysis of asset accessibility and exploitation potential that guided caregiver placement and care plan development. Their sophisticated understanding of elderly isolation patterns, cognitive vulnerability factors, and family relationship dynamics enabled systematic selection of clients whose circumstances maximized exploitation opportunities while minimizing detection risk and family intervention potential. The exploitation coordination techniques that connected all network members included systematic communication protocols for information sharing, strategic planning meetings for operation coordination, and comprehensive documentation systems that protected criminal activity while maintaining the appearance of professional healthcare coordination and quality elder care service delivery. The sophisticated organizational structure that supported systematic elder exploitation demonstrated extensive planning and coordination rather than isolated criminal behavior or individual exploitation incidents. The financial benefit distribution system that the Riverside Network had established included systematic profit sharing from client exploitation, strategic coordination of asset access and financial manipulation, and comprehensive money laundering operations that concealed criminal proceeds while maintaining the appearance of legitimate healthcare employment and professional medical service compensation. The sophisticated financial coordination that supported systematic elder exploitation demonstrated extensive criminal planning and institutional enablement rather than individual moral failure or isolated professional misconduct. The regulatory evasion strategies that the Riverside Network employed included systematic manipulation of healthcare oversight procedures, strategic coordination with regulatory officials and healthcare administrators, and comprehensive documentation systems that concealed criminal activity while maintaining the appearance of regulatory compliance and professional healthcare standards. The sophisticated understanding of healthcare industry oversight limitations that enable continued elder exploitation demonstrated extensive institutional knowledge and regulatory manipulation, rather than simple oversight gaps or enforcement limitations. The victim selection criteria that guided Riverside Network operations included systematic assessment of elderly wealth indicators, strategic evaluation of family oversight limitations, and comprehensive analysis of cognitive vulnerability factors that maximized exploitation potential while minimizing detection risk and legal accountability. The sophisticated targeting methodology that enabled systematic elder exploitation demonstrated extensive criminal planning and victim assessment, rather than opportunistic abuse or coincidental criminal behavior. The psychological justification systems that network members employed included systematic rationalization of elder exploitation as fair compensation for professional service, strategic presentation of criminal behavior as quality healthcare delivery, and comprehensive moral flexibility that eliminated ethical constraints while maintaining self-image as dedicated healthcare professionals and compassionate elder care providers. The sophisticated psychological manipulation that enabled systematic criminal behavior demonstrated extensive moral compromise and character corruption rather than situational ethical failure or temporary moral weakness. The long-term planning coordination that characterized Riverside Network operations included systematic preparation for exploitation discovery and legal defense, strategic development of alternative exploitation opportunities and client access methods, and comprehensive criminal activity expansion that demonstrated institutional commitment to elder exploitation rather than isolated criminal incidents or individual moral failure requiring professional accountability and legal prosecution. This comprehensive examination of the Riverside Elder Exploitation Network revealed a sophisticated criminal organization whose systematic targeting of vulnerable elderly clients, professional coordination of privacy violations and financial abuse, and institutional protection of exploitative caregivers created the perfect environment for the bathroom surveillance installation that would ultimately trigger comprehensive media investigation and public exposure of their criminal operations on a national scale that would transform their comfortable assumptions about elderly vulnerability into the most public humiliation and criminal prosecution that any elder exploitation network had ever experienced through systematic media coverage and law enforcement coordination. The psychological profiles that emerged from this analysis demonstrated that Sarah, Tommy, Linda, and David were not isolated bad actors making poor individual choices, but sophisticated criminals who had systematically developed and implemented comprehensive elder exploitation operations that required extensive planning, coordination, and institutional support to maintain continued access to vulnerable elderly clients while avoiding regulator-wide detection and legal accountability for their systematic criminal behavior and professional misconduct. The escalation of systematic boundary violations and privacy invasions from subtle professional overreach to comprehensive elder abuse occurred with such calculated precision and sophisticated coordination between Sarah and Tommy that I found myself documenting not just the individual incidents of exploitation and manipulation, but the systematic methodology they employed to gradually strip away my dignity while maintaining plausible medical justification for their behavior and creating conditions that made resistance appear confused or medically inadvisable rather than legitimate self-defense against sophisticated criminal exploitation and elder abuse. The medication management interference that marked the first concrete expansion beyond appropriate professional boundaries began approximately 1 month after the initial care arrangement, when Sarah started systematically reorganizing my prescription, coordination, and medical supply management in ways that created dependency while gathering comprehensive information about my health conditions, medical history, and healthcare provider relationships. Her systematic approach to presenting these changes as improved medical coordination rather than privacy violations demonstrated sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation that made opposition appear medically irresponsible while building foundation for increasingly aggressive behavior and systematic elimination of my healthcare autonomy and medical decision-making independence. The prescription access control that Sarah gradually implemented included systematic coordination of pharmacy communications, strategic management of refill scheduling, and comprehensive oversight of medication delivery that positioned basic Healthcare management as professional caregiver responsibility rather than individual patient autonomy deserving respect and protection. Her systematic presentation of these restrictions as medical safety coordination rather than healthcare manipulation created additional justification for systematic elimination of independent medical management while building practical dependency that served her control objectives and information gathering requirements rather than genuine healthcare improvement or patient welfare enhancement. The medical appointment coordination interference that followed demonstrated Sarah's systematic approach to healthcare communication control and medical provider relationship management that eliminated my direct contact with healthcare professionals, while positioning caregiver oversight as medical necessity rather than patient advocacy violation requiring ethical restraint and professional boundary maintenance. Her systematic involvement in appointment scheduling, medical consultation coordination, and healthcare communication management created comprehensive medical dependency while gathering detailed information about my health status, treatment protocols, and medical provider assessments that served exploitation planning rather than legitimate healthcare coordination and patient welfare protection. The pharmacy relationship manipulation that characterized Sarah's approach to prescription coordination included systematic communication with pharmacists about my medication management, strategic coordination of prescription delivery and pickup services, and comprehensive oversight of pharmaceutical communication that eliminated my direct relationship with pharmacy professionals while creating systematic access to detailed medical information and prescription history that served financial exploitation planning rather than legitimate healthcare coordination and medication management improvement. The physical therapy interference that Sarah implemented during my stroke recovery period included systematic oversight of therapeutic exercise coordination, strategic manipulation of therapy scheduling and provider communication, and comprehensive control over rehabilitation progress documentation that position caregiver supervision as medical necessity rather than recognizing the therapeutic independence and patient autonomy that promote successful rehabilitation and recovery progress. Her systematic involvement in therapy sessions, exercise coordination, and progress assessment created additional medical dependency while gathering comprehensive information about my physical capability, ties and recovery timeline that served exploitation planning rather than rehabilitation support and independence restoration. The dietary control escalation that followed the medication management interference included systematic oversight of meal planning and nutrition coordination, strategic control over grocery shopping and food preparation, and comprehensive management of dietary choices that position nutritional supervision as medical necessity rather than recognizing the personal autonomy and individual preference that characterize appropriate elder care and professional healthcare service. Sarah's systematic approach to presenting these restrictions as health management and nutritional coordination rather than controlling behavior created additional justification for systematic elimination of independent nutrition management while building practical dependency that reinforced her authority and control over basic life coordination. The grocery shopping manipulation that Sarah employed included systematic control over food purchasing decisions, strategic coordination of shopping scheduling and vendor relationships, and comprehensive oversight of household food management that eliminated my independent access to nutrition coordination while creating systematic documentation of my dietary preferences, eating patterns, and food-related behaviors that served exploitation planning rather than legitimate health care, coordination, and nutritional support. Her systematic presentation of shopping assistance as medical necessity rather than personal service created additional dependency while gathering detailed information about my lifestyle patterns and household coordination preferences. The meal preparation control that characterized Sarah's approach to nutrition management included systematic oversight of cooking activities, strategic restriction of kitchen access and appliance usage, and comprehensive coordination of food Preparation that position culinary supervision as safety necessity rather than recognizing the independence and personal autonomy that support successful aging and dignity preservation. Her systematic involvement in meal planning, cooking coordination, and dietary management created additional practical dependency while eliminating opportunities for independent household coordination and personal choice expression that might interfere with systematic control and manipulation objectives. The kitchen access limitations that demonstrated Sarah's systematic approach to household control included specific timing requirements for appliance usage, systematic restrictions on cooking equipment and food preparation areas, and the kind of domestic space management that positioned basic nutrition coordination as privilege requiring approval rather than fundamental independence right deserving respect and accommodation. The presentation of these restrictions as safety coordination and kitchen organization rather than controlling behavior created additional justification for systematic elimination of independent household management while building comprehensive domestic dependency that served her control objectives rather than genuine safety improvement or household efficiency enhancement. The bathroom scheduling pressure that revealed Sarah's systematic approach to personal care control included systematic oversight of bathing and hygiene routines, strategic coordination of bathroom access and personal care timing, and comprehensive management of privacy coordination that positioned basic personal care as medical supervision requirement rather than individual autonomy deserving respect and protection. Her systematic presentation of bathroom scheduling as safety coordination and fall prevention rather than privacy violation created additional justification for systematic elimination of independent personal care while building comprehensive intimate access that served surveillance objectives rather than genuine safety improvement or medical necessity. The personal care interference that characterized Sarah's approach to hygiene coordination included systematic involvement in bathing assistance, strategic oversight of grooming and personal appearance management, and comprehensive coordination of intimate care activities that eliminated personal privacy while gathering detailed information about my physical condition, personal habits, and intimate routines that served exploitation planning rather than legitimate health care, assistance, and personal care support. Her systematic presentation of personal care involvement as medical necessity rather than privacy violation created additional dependency while establishing intimate access that would later facilitate comprehensive surveillance and privacy invasion. The communication monitoring that Tommy implemented during his night shift responsibilities included systematic oversight of telephone usage, strategic coordination of electronic communication access, and comprehensive management of social interaction that position communication supervision as safety necessity rather than recognizing the privacy rights and social autonomy that support successful aging and community connection maintenance. His systematic approach to presenting communication monitoring as emergency coordination and safety management rather than social isolation created additional justification for systematic elimination of independent social coordination while building communication control that served information gathering and manipulation objectives. The telephone access restrictions that demonstrated Tommy's systematic approach to social control included systematic monitoring of incoming and outgoing calls, strategic coordination of conversation timing and privacy access, and comprehensive oversight of communication coordination that eliminated independent social interaction while gathering detailed information about my personal relationships, family dynamics, and social support networks that served exploitation planning rather than legitimate safety coordination and emergency communication management. His systematic presentation of telephone monitoring as safety coordination rather than privacy violation created additional justification for comprehensive social isolation and communication control. The computer usage interference that Tommy employed included systematic oversight of Internet access and electronic communication, strategic coordination of technology usage and online activity, and comprehensive monitoring of digital communication that position computer supervision as technical assistance rather than recognizing the privacy rights and communication autonomy that support independent living and social connection maintenance. His systematic involvement in computer coordination, email management, and Internet usage created additional technological dependency while gathering comprehensive information about my digital communication patterns, online activities, and electronic relationships that served surveillance objectives rather than legitimate technical support. The mail handling control that both caregivers implemented included systematic oversight of postal delivery and correspondence management, strategic coordination of mail sorting and document handling, and comprehensive control over written communication that eliminated independent correspondence while gathering detailed information about my financial relationships, legal coordination, and personal communication patterns that served exploitation planning rather than legitimate household assistance and mail coordination support. Their systematic presentation of mail management as organizational assistance rather than privacy violation created additional justification for comprehensive communication control and information access. The visitor access restrictions that characterized both caregivers' approach to social control included systematic discouragement of guest visits and social interaction, strategic coordination of household access and visitor management, and comprehensive oversight of social coordination that position visitor supervision as household management necessity rather than recognizing the social autonomy and relationship privacy that support successful aging and community connection maintenance. Their systematic approach to presenting visitor restrictions as household organization and safety coordination rather than social isolation created additional justification for systematic elimination of independent social interaction while building comprehensive relationship control that served manipulation objectives. The financial coordination pressure that both caregivers employed included systematic involvement in expense management and financial planning, strategic oversight of banking coordination and bill payment activities, and comprehensive coordination of financial decision-making that position money management assistance as cognitive support necessity rather than recognizing the financial autonomy and economic independence that support dignity preservation and personal empowerment. Their systematic presentation of financial involvement as practical assistance rather than economic manipulation created additional justification for systematic elimination of independent financial management while building comprehensive economic access that served exploitation objectives rather than legitimate financial coordination support. The banking relationship interference that Sarah specifically coordinated included systematic communication with financial institutions about my account management, strategic involvement in banking transaction coordination, and comprehensive oversight of financial institution relationships that eliminated my direct banking communication while gathering detailed information about my financial status, account management, and banking coordination that served asset assessment and exploitation planning rather than legitimate financial assistance and banking coordination support. Her systematic presentation of banking involvement as practical assistance rather than financial manipulation created additional dependency while establishing comprehensive financial access and information gathering capability. The bill payment control that both caregivers implemented included systematic oversight of monthly expense coordination, strategic management of vendor relationships and payment scheduling, and comprehensive control over financial obligation management that eliminated independent expense coordination while gathering data information about my financial commitments, monthly expenses, and payment patterns that served financial exploitation planning rather than legitimate household assistance and expense management support. Their systematic presentation of bill payment assistance as cognitive support rather than financial control created additional justification for comprehensive economic oversight and financial information access. The insurance coordination manipulation That both caregivers employed included systematic involvement in healthcare coverage management, strategic oversight of insurance communication and claim coordination, and comprehensive control over coverage decision-making that positioned insurance assistance as medical necessity rather than recognizing the healthcare autonomy and insurance independence that support appropriate medical care and financial protection. Their systematic presentation of insurance involvement as healthcare coordination rather than financial manipulation created additional justification for systematic elimination of independent healthcare management while building comprehensive medical and financial access that served exploitation objectives. The legal document interference that both caregivers gradually implemented included systematic involvement in legal correspondence management, strategic oversight of legal consultation, coordination, and comprehensive control over legal decision-making that position legal assistance as cognitive support necessity rather than recognizing the legal autonomy and decision-making independence that support personal empowerment and rights protection. Their systematic presentation of legal involvement as practical assistance rather than legal manipulation created additional justification for systematic elimination of independent legal coordination while building comprehensive access to legal information and decision-making processes that served exploitation planning. The property management control that both caregivers established included systematic oversight of household maintenance coordination, strategic involvement in property service management, and comprehensive control over home maintenance decision-making that eliminated independent property coordination while gathering detailed information about my property value, maintenance requirements, and household coordination that served asset assessment and exploitation planning rather than legitimate property assistance and household management support. Their systematic presentation of property involvement as practical assistance rather than property control created additional dependency while establishing comprehensive property access and management capability. The home security interference that both caregivers implemented included systematic involvement in security system coordination, strategic oversight of home protection management, and comprehensive control over security decision-making that positions security assistance as safety necessity rather than recognizing the privacy rights and security autonomy that support independent living and personal protection. Their systematic presentation of security involvement as safety coordination rather than privacy violation created additional justification for systematic elimination of independent security management while building comprehensive home access and security control that served surveillance objectives rather than legitimate safety improvement and security enhancement. The communication monitoring that Tommy implemented during his night shift responsibilities included systematic oversight of telephone usage, strategic coordination of electronic communication access, and comprehensive management of social interaction that position communication supervision as safety necessity rather than recognizing the privacy rights and social autonomy that support successful aging and community connection maintenance. His systematic approach to presenting communication monitoring as emergency coordination and safety management rather than social isolation created additional justification for systematic elimination of independent social coordination while building communication control that served information gathering and manipulation objectives. The telephone access restrictions that demonstrated Tommy's systematic approach to social control included systematic monitoring of incoming and outgoing calls, strategic coordination of conversation timing and privacy access, and comprehensive oversight of communication coordination that eliminated independent social interaction while gathering detailed information about my personal relationships, family dynamics, and social support networks that served exploitation planning rather than legitimate safety coordination and emergency communication management. His systematic presentation of telephone monitoring as safety coordination rather than privacy violation created additional justification for comprehensive social isolation and communication control. The computer usage interference that Tommy employed included systematic oversight of Internet access and electronic communication, strategic coordination of technology usage and online activity, and comprehensive monitoring of digital communication that position computer supervision as technical assistance rather than recognizing the privacy rights and communication autonomy that support independent living and social connection maintenance. His systematic involvement in computer coordination, email management, and Internet usage created additional technological dependency while gathering comprehensive information about my digital communication patterns, online activities, and electronic relationships that served surveillance objectives rather than legitimate technical support. The mail handling control that both caregivers implemented included systematic oversight of postal delivery and correspondence management, strategic coordination of mail sorting and document handling, and comprehensive control over written communication that eliminated independent correspondence while gathering detailed information about my financial relationships, legal coordination, and personal communication patterns that served exploitation planning rather than legitimate household assistance and mail coordination support. Their systematic presentation of mail management as organizational assistance rather than privacy violation created additional justification for comprehensive communication control and information access. The visitor access restrictions that characterized both caregivers' approach to social control included systematic discouragement of guest visits and social interaction, strategic coordination of household access and visitor management, and comprehensive oversight of social coordination that position visitor supervision as household management necessity rather than recognizing the social autonomy and relationship privacy that support successful aging and community connection maintenance. Their systematic approach to presenting visitor restrictions as household organization and safety coordination rather than social isolation created additional justification for systematic elimination of independent social interaction while building comprehensive relationship control that served manipulation objectives. The financial coordination pressure that both caregivers employed included systematic involvement in expense management and financial planning, strategic oversight of banking coordination and bill payment activities, and comprehensive coordination of financial decision-making that position money management assistance as cognitive support necessity rather than recognizing the financial autonomy and economic independence that support dignity preservation and personal empowerment. Their systematic presentation of financial involvement as practical assistance rather than economic manipulation created additional justification for systematic elimination of independent financial management while building comprehensive economic access that served exploitation objectives rather than legitimate financial coordination support. The banking relationship interference that Sarah specifically coordinated included systematic communication with financial institutions about my account management, strategic involvement in banking transaction coordination, and comprehensive oversight of financial institution relationships that eliminated my direct banking communication while gathering detailed information about my financial status, account management, and banking coordination that served asset assessment and exploitation planning rather than legitimate financial assistance and banking coordination support. Her systematic presentation of banking involvement as practical assistance rather than financial manipulation created additional dependency while establishing comprehensive financial access and information gathering capability. The bill payment control that both caregivers implemented included systematic oversight of monthly expense coordination, strategic management of vendor relationships and payment scheduling, and comprehensive control over financial obligation management that eliminated independent expense coordination while gathering data information about my financial commitments, monthly expenses, and payment patterns that served financial exploitation planning rather than legitimate household assistance and expense management support. Their systematic presentation of bill payment assistance as cognitive support rather than financial control created additional justification for comprehensive economic oversight and financial information access, the insurance coordination manipulation that both caregivers employed included systematic involvement in healthcare coverage management, strategic oversight of insurance communication and claim coordination, and comprehensive control over coverage decision-making that positioned insurance assistance as medical necessity rather than recognizing the healthcare autonomy and insurance independence that support appropriate medical care and financial protection. Their systematic presentation of insurance involvement as healthcare coordination rather than financial manipulation created additional justification for systematic elimination of independent healthcare management while building comprehensive medical and financial access that served exploitation objectives. The legal document interference that both caregivers gradually implemented included systematic involvement in legal correspondence management, strategic oversight of legal consultation, coordination, and comprehensive control over legal decision-making that position legal assistance as cognitive support necessity rather than recognizing the legal autonomy and decision-making independence that support personal empowerment and rights protection. Their systematic presentation of legal involvement as practical assistance rather than legal manipulation created additional justification for systematic elimination of independent legal coordination while building comprehensive access to legal information and decision-making processes that served exploitation planning. The property management control that both caregivers established included systematic oversight of household maintenance coordination, strategic involvement in property service management, and comprehensive control over home maintenance decision-making that eliminated independent property coordination while gathering detailed information about my property value, maintenance requirements, and household coordination that served asset assessment and exploitation planning rather than legitimate property assistance and household management support. Their systematic presentation of property involvement as practical assistance rather than property control created additional dependency while establishing comprehensive property access and management capability. The home security interference that both caregivers implemented included systematic involvement in security system coordination, strategic oversight of home protection management, and comprehensive control over security decision-making that positioned security assistance as safety necessity rather than recognizing the privacy rights and security autonomy that support independent living and personal protection. Their systematic presentation of security involvement as safety coordination rather than privacy violation created additional justification for systematic elimination of independent security management while building comprehensive home access and security control that served surveillance objectives rather than legitimate safety improvement and security enhancement. My first phone call was to Detective Lieutenant Maria Santos of the Connecticut State Police Elder Abuse Unit, a professional contact I had developed during my investigation of nursing home fraud in 2018. Detective Santos had been instrumental in prosecuting a major elder exploitation ring at that time, and her expertise in healthcare fraud and institutional abuse made her the perfect law enforcement contact for coordinating criminal investigation while ensuring comprehensive evidence collection and proper prosecutorial coordination for maximum criminal accountability and justice delivery. Detective Santos, I said, using the secure phone line that I maintain for professional communication, this is Maggie Sullivan. I need immediate assistance with a criminal elder abuse case involving systematic privacy violations and exploitation. The perpetrators have installed surveillance cameras in my bathroom, and I have reason to believe this is part of a larger criminal network operating through healthcare agencies. Can you coordinate immediate response and evidence collection? Detective Santos's response was immediate and comprehensive. Within 2 hours, a full investigative team had arrived at my home including crime scene technicians, digital forensics specialists, and elder abuse investigators who began systematic documentation of the surveillance equipment. While coordinating with the State Attorney General's Office for Prosecution Planning and federal coordination for potential interstate criminal activity and healthcare fraud violations, the evidence collection that followed revealed the full extent of the surveillance network that Sarah and Tommy had installed throughout my home, in addition to the bathroom camera. Investigators discovered hidden recording devices in my bedroom, living room, kitchen, and home office that had been systematically documenting my daily activities, personal conversations, and private behaviors for comprehensive intelligence gathering that served identity theft, financial exploitation, and asset assessment rather than any legitimate medical or safety purpose. The digital forensics analysis that the state police conducted revealed that the surveillance data was being transmitted to external servers and shared with multiple individuals beyond Sarah and Tommy, indicating systematic coordination with a larger criminal network that included other Riverside employees and external partners involved in comprehensive elder exploitation operations throughout Connecticut and neighboring states. The sophisticated nature of the surveillance technology and data management systems demonstrated extensive criminal planning and coordination rather than isolated exploitation incidents. My second phone call was to Jennifer Walsh, executive producer of investigative reports at Channel 8 News in Hartford, a former colleague who had worked with me on several high-profile corruption investigations and who maintained the journalistic integrity and professional standards necessary for comprehensive media coverage that would educate the public while ensuring accurate reporting and appropriate legal coordination throughout the investigation and prosecution process. "Jennifer," I said, "this is Maggie Sullivan. I have a major elder abuse story involving systematic privacy violations, institutional enablement, and criminal exploitation that requires immediate investigative coverage. The perpetrators installed cameras in my bathroom as part of a comprehensive surveillance operation, and law enforcement has confirmed this is connected to a larger criminal network. Are you interested in exclusive coverage of what may be the largest elder exploitation investigation in Connecticut history?" Jennifer's response was immediate and enthusiastic. Within hours, Channel 8's investigative team had coordinated with law enforcement for appropriate coverage that would support criminal prosecution while providing comprehensive public education about elder exploitation methods and institutional abuse that could protect other vulnerable elderly individuals from similar criminal victimization and systematic abuse. The media coordination that followed included comprehensive interviews with law enforcement officials, legal experts, and elder advocacy organizations that provided detailed explanation of the criminal methods employed by the Riverside Network, while educating the public about warning signs of elder exploitation and institutional abuse that could prevent future victimization and promote community awareness about the sophisticated criminal operations that target vulnerable elderly populations throughout healthcare and home care industries. My third phone call was to Robert Chen, senior producer at 60 Minutes, a professional contact who had consulted with me on several investigative pieces over the years and who maintained the resources and national platform necessary for comprehensive elder abuse coverage that could promote systematic reform and institutional accountability while providing detailed investigation of the healthcare industry weaknesses that enable criminal exploitation and systematic abuse of elderly clients. "Robert," I said, "this is Maggie Sullivan. I have a compelling elder abuse story that involves systematic privacy violations, institutional criminal coordination, and comprehensive exploitation networks operating through licensed healthcare agencies. This story has national implications for elder care reform and healthcare industry accountability. The perpetrators installed surveillance cameras in my bathroom. An investigation has revealed extensive criminal coordination. Are you interested in comprehensive coverage that could promote national reform and institutional accountability?" Robert's immediate interest in the story led to coordination with CBS News for national coverage that would complement local reporting. while providing detailed investigation of the regulatory failures and institutional enablement that allowed the Riverside criminal network to operate with impunity while systematically exploiting vulnerable elderly clients throughout multiple states and healthcare jurisdictions. The comprehensive media strategy that I coordinated included simultaneous coverage across multiple platforms and jurisdictions to ensure maximum public exposure, while supporting law enforcement investigation and prosecutorial accountability for the systematic criminal activity that characterized the Riverside Elder Exploitation Network. The coordination between local, state, and national media outlets created comprehensive coverage that educated the public while promoting institutional reform and regulatory accountability that could prevent similar criminal operations. The investigation expansion that followed my media coordination revealed that the Riverside Home Care Agency Elder Exploitation Network had been operating for over 5 years, targeting wealthy elderly clients throughout Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New York while systematically violating privacy rights, manipulating financial access, and coordinating identity theft that had affected over 200 elderly victims and resulted in millions of dollars in financial losses and systematic dignity violations that represented some of the most extensive elder abuse ever documented. The criminal charges that resulted from the comprehensive investigation included multiple felony counts against Sarah Mitchell and Tommy Rodriguez for invasion of privacy, elder abuse, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud, while Linda Hoffman and David Reynolds faced additional charges for institutional coordination of criminal activity and systematic violation of healthcare regulations and professional standards. The sophisticated nature of their criminal operation resulted in federal charges for interstate commerce violations and healthcare fraud that carried substantial prison sentences and financial penalties. The media coverage that documented their arrests and prosecution included detailed investigation of their criminal methods, systematic documentation of victim impact, and comprehensive analysis of the institutional failures that enabled their criminal operation to continue for years without detection or accountability. The national attention that the case received promoted extensive discussion about elder care reform, healthcare industry regulation, and the systematic protection that vulnerable elderly populations require to prevent criminal exploitation and institutional abuse. The civil litigation that followed the criminal prosecution included comprehensive lawsuits against Riverside Home Care Agency, their insurance providers, and the regulatory agencies that failed to detect and prevent the systematic criminal activity that characterized their operation. The substantial financial settlements that resulted from these lawsuits provided compensation for victims while creating financial accountability that promoted institutional reform and regulatory improvement throughout the healthcare industry. The institutional consequences that resulted from the comprehensive investigation and media coverage included the permanent closure of Riverside Home Care Agency, systematic investigation of similar agencies throughout the region, and comprehensive regulatory reform that strengthened oversight and accountability requirements for home health care providers while implementing enhanced protection for elderly clients, and systematic monitoring of caregiver behavior and institutional coordination. The professional consequences that Sarah, Tommy, Linda, and David experienced included permanent revocation of healthcare licenses, placement on national databases that prevent future healthcare employment, and systematic criminal prosecution that resulted in substantial prison sentences and financial penalties that reflected the severity of their criminal activity and the extensive harm they had caused to vulnerable elderly victims throughout their exploitation network operation. The media recognition that the case received included detailed documentation in major news outlets, extensive television coverage on national programs, and comprehensive investigation and documentary format that provided detailed education about elder exploitation methods while promoting public awareness and institutional accountability that could prevent similar criminal operations from targeting vulnerable elderly populations in the future. The regulatory reform that resulted from the comprehensive investigation included enhanced background screening requirements for healthcare workers, systematic monitoring of caregiver behavior and client interaction, and comprehensive accountability, measures that strengthen protection for elderly clients while promoting institutional transparency and regulatory oversight throughout the healthcare industry. The legislative action that followed the media coverage included comprehensive elder protection legislation at both state and federal levels that strengthened criminal penalties for elder abuse, enhanced regulatory oversight of healthcare agencies, and systematic protection for elderly privacy rights that reflected the lessons learned from the Riverside investigation and prosecution. The community impact that resulted from the comprehensive media coverage included extensive public education about elder exploitation warning signs, systematic training for family members and community organizations about protection strategies, and comprehensive awareness campaigns that promoted vigilance and advocacy for elderly community members who might be vulnerable to similar criminal exploitation and institutional abuse. The long-term consequences for the perpetrators included substantial prison sentences that reflected the severity of their criminal activity, comprehensive financial penalties that provided victim compensation while creating personal accountability, and permanent exclusion from healthcare employment that protected future elderly clients from their criminal behavior and exploitation methods. The personal satisfaction that I experienced from coordinating this comprehensive justice delivery included not just the accountability for my own victimization, but the protection of hundreds of other elderly individuals who might have been targeted by similar criminal operations, the institutional reform that strengthened elder protection throughout the healthcare industry, and the professional fulfillment of using my investigative journalism skills to protect vulnerable populations and promote justice for systematic institutional abuse. The ultimate lesson that Sarah, Tommy, Linda, and David learned through their comprehensive prosecution and media exposure was that elderly individuals often possess sophisticated professional capability, ties, extensive networks of institutional relationships, and comprehensive resources for justice delivery that can transform apparent vulnerability into powerful accountability and systematic criminal exposure that reaches national audiences. How promoting institutional reform and community protection. Remember, respect and protect elderly individuals not just because it's morally right, but because you never know when the vulnerable elderly person you're exploiting might actually possess the professional expertise and institutional connections necessary to transform your criminal behavior into front-page news and comprehensive criminal prosecution. Sometimes the most powerful lesson about dignity and respect comes from discovering exactly who you've been victimizing, and Sarah, Tommy, Linda, and David learned that lesson through the most public and comprehensive consequences that any elder exploitation network had ever experienced. What would you have done if you discovered cameras in your bathroom? How do you think we can better protect elderly family members from exploitation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found this story of justice inspiring, make sure you're subscribed because next week I'm sharing the story of how a helpless nursing home resident who was being systematically drugged and robbed turned out to be a retired federal prosecutor, and what happened when she called her former colleagues at the Department of Justice for a surprise inspection that changed everything. The satisfaction of watching their faces on every news channel as the comprehensive investigation unfolded provided exactly the justice that their systematic privacy violations and elder exploitation deserved, while demonstrating that respect for elderly dignity isn't just a moral obligation, it's a practical necessity when you never know who you're actually dealing with and what professional capabilities and institutional connections they might possess for comprehensive accountability and justice delivery. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.